Welcome to today's session. Thank you for joining us. I believe we have people joining in from the country and across the continent. So thank you very much for making the time to be with us this afternoon. Very warm welcome. Today's webinar titled Embedding Social Performance in Renewable Energy Lessons from Practitioners Across Africa. This comes from a study that we have been doing for the past couple of months. And in today's session, we would like to share the findings with everyone, but also have a bit of a discussion around that with practitioners across the continent. My name is Anda Mchinjo, Project Officer at Inspire, and I've been working very closely with this project together with one of the presenters in today's session, Lesedi Komi, where we undertook quite an interesting study, and we have a lot of interesting findings to share, as well as expert panelists who took part in the study. A bit of insights from practitioners on the ground who participated in the study, and this forms as a launch of the study officially. I can say that the study is now available on our website, and we're going to share the link on how to access it on our LinkedIn page following this call. We would obviously like to understand emerging trends in social performance practice as the study was intended, and understand the key challenges influencing implementation in renewable energy projects using the lens of social performance, of course, and the opportunities to enhance collaboration and impact across Africa, which is something our panel discussion before this off. Inspired and say is to co-create a just transition with strong and actively participating community, and we seek to do that following a couple of values around justice, trust, collaboration, learning, and transforming. And we hope to do that with each and every one of you, and obviously across the African region as well, as we have tried to do with the study. We center a lot of our work around our theory of change. It is available on our website if you would like to have a look at that. And we are governed by a board comprising of experts who have worked across the renewable energy sector across Africa, around the globe. And currently our chairperson, Libby Hershen, who's a sustainability advisor at AIM's African Transition at the African Transition Accelerator Fund. Libby serves as our current chairperson of the board, and we have two new members of the board. My team is steered by our managing director, Hannah Vlockers, with a small dynamite, including and others think in expertise to guide and help the organization to grow. And we have a lot of international partners as well, and other organizations that we work with across the country. But to help us frame the conversation today, as we heard our chairperson of the board, Libby is Sustainability Advisor at the African Transition Accelerator Fund at AIM, and brings in decades of experience across the energy infrastructure in Africa. And what we hope to cover in Libby's session is how the renewable energy sector has evolved, the persistent and systematic gaps we continue to see in doing social performance work, and what needs to change to move social performance and the implementation of renewable energy projects from compliance to partnership. Please help me welcome Libby Hershen, who will be reflecting on her experience working across the African continent and other areas around renewable energy. Over to you, Libby.
Thank you, Anda. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be on this webinar with you all. I think this is a wonderful opportunity, and I'm really, I feel like it's a privilege to have been invited to just do a bit of strategic reflection here, especially in light of this study, which I think really gives an opportunity for all of us to understand some of the lived experience of social performance practitioners across the continent. So I'll try and just keep my reflections in light of that. I thought I'd just mention I have been working on the African continent in social performance for about 25 years. So it's been really, really interesting to reflect on where we were 25 years ago and where we've got to now. The majority of my career was across the African continent, actually excluding South Africa. So for the first about 18 years of my career, I worked across Africa in various different African countries on social performance and primarily on projects with significant social performance aspects. And so over time, really got to see the different country contexts and how social performance was implemented. And then in the last sort of 7 or 8 years of my career, I really have focused mainly in the South African environment. So it's been a very interesting reflection for me to see, well, look at the South African environment. How is social performance advanced and what's still missing? And how does that reflect in the African experience? And I think this study gives us some really good insights, which I won't go into too much because I know that that's what the rest of the webinar is about. But just then to reflect on sort of what I've seen. So I think in the beginning, in the early 2000s, in the African context, and specifically, at that stage, very little renewable energy, if any. It was more energy experience. Social performance wasn't social performance as we know it. It was really about being a good neighbor, about CSI, acting responsibly, doing consultation, etc. And over time, it's grown to really reflect some of the responsibilities that are required when working on the continent, when it comes to the communities in which renewable energy companies operate, and also the risks that developers have now seen. And I think over time, what's been very evident is that with the increasing growth of renewable energy, well, of the energy sector and then renewable energy, there's been more and more awareness, not just with social performance practitioners, but broader developers, investors, funders around the importance of investing in social performance because of the risks that have arisen and continue to arise, increasingly arise, associated with social performance, but also the importance of creating value creation. And I think with the rise of extensive information sharing, access to information, the rise of expectations, that has become increasingly important. Before I go further with that, I just wanted to reflect then on the differences, kind of what we've seen in the South African environment, and then reflecting into the outside of South African environment. I think those of us who have worked in the South African environment are very aware of how regulated it is, thanks to REAP. And also thanks to our strong EIA regulation that requires public participation. And I think that in South Africa, what we've seen is there's been this formalization of benefit sharing through the REAP requirements, and then this formalization of public participation. And we've got this rigorous framework that has required us to spend time, to spend investment, to have social performance practitioners in the projects, and to ensure that that this aspect of projects is looked after. That said, we are still grappling with this translating into real benefits on the ground, into real long-term transformational impact. And I think what's clear from that is, even if you have the regulations, even if you have the frameworks, it does not necessarily translate into the real impact that we're trying to have. And I think that that's one of the reasons why Inspire, for example, was set up to look at, okay, well, how is it that in South Africa, as a starting point, we can actually start to get that right? And of course, some of the findings from the study is saying the same thing, that in across all the countries where the lived experience of these practitioners is looked at, and in some countries where there are the good frameworks, where there is strong lender requirements, it's still not necessarily translating into impact. And I think what I was struck by when I had a read through of the report is, we as social practitioners, whether we've changed from social development specialists or whatever we used to be called in the past, we keep saying the same thing actually. And the lessons we're learning are the same. And we all becoming more and more familiar with these lessons. But at the same time, we as a group of practitioners are saying the same thing. And there has been development and there has been improvement. But yet we're seeing the same challenges, we're seeing the same roadblocks, and we still having the same frustrations around us as practitioners being brought in early enough, us as practitioners actually helping to make the strategic decisions. We're still seeing the power, the lack of alignment of power between communities that are being impacted and we calling partners, and the ones with the money, the developers, the banks, the DFIs, etc. So I think a lot of the lessons are similar. We're saying the same thing, and I think, yeah, I mean, if I reflect on this strategically, what comes to mind is that we're getting much better at developing frameworks. We're getting much better at sharing experiences. Things like this study are incredibly insightful for us to see, okay, there's a lot of challenges we're sharing across countries. There's some differences. We're bringing that experience together and saying, how can we improve things? But I think at the end of the day, where I'm seeing the biggest gap is kind of, it's a structural issue. It's around who are the influencers here, and are we talking to the right people? And how are we talking to those people? I would say that I sometimes get a little bit frustrated, and I wonder if the rest of you do. And that I feel like often we speaking to the converted. We're coming together because we're frustrated. We want to have more impact. We are learning. We are growing. We are doing better work. But are we having the right impact? And I think that we're not always speaking to the right audience. So I guess my challenge would be, how do we take these learnings that we're all sharing, and we're getting each other, and we're seeing, yes, things like where trust is an issue. So, for example, in Zambia, there's a trust deficit we're seeing from the study. In Kenya, there's some historical mistrust issues and differences in cultural approach in engagement with communities. In Nigeria, there's a mistrust at the governance level. In Tanzania, there's a mistrust at the expectation level. How can we bring all of this together and make a difference? And how can we bring that to really the decision makers and the ones who can make the difference, bring us in earlier, etc. So yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I hope I'd like to hope that's useful. My challenge, as I say, would be to say, how can we take this to the next level? In this webinar, for example, let's bring our heads together and go, yes, we're learning all these things, we're doing these improvements, we're sharing all this, but how can we take it to the next level to influence the influencers, to bring all of these things to the decision makers, so that we truly are brought in earlier, that engagement happens at an early stage, and that there's not this power mismatch. Yeah, so thank you very much. I think that summarizes what I wanted to say. Happy to take questions at the right time, Under. You'll guide us in that respect. But yeah, really good luck with the challenge. We all know as social performance practitioners that it's a very challenging job. But but one that really brings great rewards if we continue to learn and share through these kind of forums. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Libby, for sharing. We will have a bit of time later in the call to have questions. So if you'd like to ask Libby any question related to her presentation, please do so in the chat, or you'll have an opportunity to raise your hand and say it to Libby much later on. But thank you very much, Libby. We are going to have 2 more sessions before that time comes, and then you can ask your questions. Let's move right along. Before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to provide a bit of context for the study. Libby has touched on some of what the study does and highlights. But before that, we had a bigger project before this study, or an intended project before the study, which we called Inspired Africa, which was driven by the recognition that obviously the renewable is rapidly expanding across the continent, and the social dynamics and dimensions of this transition remain underdeveloped, and as Libby has touched on, often disconnected to everything else that happens within project development. And the project or the project that we thought of was inspired by a key question: who is doing social performance work across the continent, and how better can we connect to support and learn from each other? So we had some efforts to try and connect to similar organizations who do the work that we do at Inspire. And initially, we were set out to do a continent-wide network of practitioners and organizations working at the intersection of renewable energy, social justice, and community development, similar to what we're doing at Inspire. However, much of our efforts quite earlier on, including various types of outreach, revealed that whilst there's an opportunity to learn and cross-collaborate, this field is quite highly fragmented, and practitioners are working in the limited opportunities for peer exchange. So the study isn't just about the research that we are launching today. It is part of a broader effort to build a community of practice in order to strengthen the field and elevate social performance in the transition. And as Libby was speaking, how do we ensure that social performance is integrated at the early stages of project implementation? So that was a bit of a background for how we came to be and have the study. So thank you for that, Libby. I think your presentation has helped us, step back and see the broader trajectory of the sector and how it is evolving. But for now, it is my pleasure to introduce Lesedi Komi, who led the undertaking of this continental practitioner study. Lesedi is a social performance practitioner with experience across community development, renewable energy, and climate change focused initiatives. She's committed to ensuring projects are inclusive, socially responsible, and designed for long-term sustainability, bringing a people-centered approach to development that strengthens community outcomes and project impact. What Lesedi will do in her presentation is take us through what the shift looks like on the ground, obviously using the study as reference, drawing from practitioner experiences across 8 countries which took part in our research, highlighting key findings, challenges, and opportunities shaping social performance today across different regions of the African continent. So over to you, Lesedi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Anda. I'm honored to have been part of this interesting and insightful study, whereby we were unpacking social performance in renewable energy projects. Like I've said, I've been honored to be part of this interesting and insightful study, whereby we were unpacking social performance in renewable energy projects. As such, 15 social performance practitioners across Africa were engaged. With regard to their background, some were coming from the government sector, private sector, civil society organizations, as well as consultancies. Now, the big question is, how did we identify these 15 practitioners, right? Stakeholder mapping as a technique or a tool was employed. That's how we managed to engage the 15 practitioners. Basically, with stakeholder mapping, you identify and analyze stakeholders using the influence and interest grid. With that being said, during the engagement or the discussions with other practitioners, as it was earlier on highlighted, the methodology that we used was basically a mixed methods approach, whereby we're using a structured questionnaire and in-depth interviews. The reason why we opted for structured questionnaire, it was to capture broad insights from the practitioners. And with the in-depth interviews, it was to understand the lived experiences of the practitioners. As such, countries represented in the study includes Botswana, Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, Tunisia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Okay. Moving on. Like I've said, the discussions with the 15 practitioners, it was so interesting. It was so engaging. As such, we came up with these key findings. Some of them includes, I think I've skipped a slide. Okay. Okay. Some of the key findings that came out of the discussions, they include positioning social performance. Like Levi has said, social performance is very critical in renewable energy. In essence, we are saying social performance should be part and parcel of the renewable energy projects. By so doing, you are building trust with communities. You are avoiding conflicts and you achieve sustainable development. Another key finding was that social performance goes beyond corporate social investment. Back then, we used to stick to corporate social investment, but now we are saying there's more beyond that, hence having the social performance practitioners. In a way, they emphasize that social performance, it goes beyond CSI, because you manage the social impacts, you safeguard livelihoods, you ensure that projects deliver meaningful and fair benefits to host communities, because in most instances, the communities are left behind. The other interesting key finding that came out of our discussions with other practitioners was that community engagement matters. It shouldn't be more like ticking a box. It should be part and parcel of the project. We are saying successful projects, they treat communities as active partners instead of beneficiaries. By the communities or the host communities being part of the projects or the renewable energy projects, they participate in decision making. We see the benefit sharing mechanism. We see the inclusion, which is very important. You build the trust and also you attain sustainable development. Still under key findings, another interesting aspect that came out when we were discussing with other practitioners was early engagement. It is important to ensure that you start early for the engagement with the communities, rather than doing it later when you are doing damage control, as we normally say it in projects. Also, we are saying social performance practitioners, they improve the project outcomes. Integrating social performance practitioners into project teams from the onset, it improves the decision making, the governance part of it, ensure that there is good stakeholder or robust stakeholder engagement, which is very critical. Still under the key findings, technical priorities often override social consideration. What do we mean by this? Basically, what we are saying is that we have seen that projects technically they're doing so well and socially they're so challenged. Now we are saying social consideration should be considered from the onset so that you prioritize it. You do not only prioritize the technical and financial aspect, but you also ensure that social inclusion is also a priority. Okay. Systematic challenges and barriers. that we experience as social performance practitioners in the renewable energy project. Some of the challenges that we discussed with other practitioners was that we see the weak governance and policy gaps. If there's weak or poor decision making and then the policies are misaligned, you experience challenges in this project. So we are saying it is a big barrier that needs to be dealt with. We also see an element of limited community engagement. As social performance practitioners, we are saying, let's have early and robust community engagement. But then if it is limited, it brings about that huge gap, which in a way intervenes with the project, ensuring that social performance is a success. We have community mistrust and conflicts. We see that most of the communities, they've been exposed to previous projects frustrations as well as traumas. Now, past failures and poor communication, it makes the communities become skeptical. Once you are coming through with a new renewable energy project, they tend to resist a project. And also it brings about conflicts. Another challenge that we came about as we were discussing was land and sociocultural complexity. We are saying land and culture, they are very sensitive in terms of getting land from the locals and also not aligning to the cultural part of it. It creates barriers to project acceptance and implementation. Another challenge that we came across was unfair benefit sharing. Once you are coming through with a renewable energy project, the community need to understand how are they benefiting, who's benefiting more, who's more at risk, who is responsible. So if you have this unfair distribution, then it brings about a lack of transparency and complaints from the host communities. Another aspect that we see is under-resourced practices. We are saying you need resources for social performance to do well. You need the resources for you to engage social performance practitioners. So in essence, we are saying that part, if it is not well addressed, then it brings about more challenges. I have a long list of challenges. As we continue, we have the power imbalances. It's also a major challenge whereby there is imbalance amongst the stakeholders. In a way, it limits the community's voice. We need to hear those voices for the host communities. There's poor coordination. Basically, with that, we see misalignment and weak information whereby it brings about confusion and efficiency. We don't want confusion. We want this coming through. So we see that coming through, which is also for some performance. And you also have the element of capacity constraint. Once this renewable energy projects come through a host community, we need the capacity for them to perform well. By so doing, we are saying limited skills and resources, they affect the effective participation and long-term sustainability, which is what we mostly want. There's governance risk and corruption. Corruption, political interference, we see it mostly here in Africa, whereby a certain group benefits more than the host communities. So we are saying it is a big challenge in the renewable energy projects. And also there's an element of unrealistic community expectations. Misaligned expectations, they create conflicts from the communities. Like I've said, once a project comes through, the communities, they have high expectations like job creation, skills development, benefit sharing mechanism. But those expectations, once they are not met, it brings about conflicts. And on its own, it's a challenge in the renewable energy projects. We also see an element of delays in approvals. This one is so common with regard to our government, whereby there is slow processing of permits, of licensing, as well as compensation for those who might have lost the land to make way for the renewable energy projects. In a way, it ends up disrupting the timelines for the projects. So we are saying some of these challenges, they need to be heeded so that there is there's progress towards renewable energy. With that being said, I would like to touch on the recommendations, which also came out as we were discussing with other practitioners. Okay. With recommendation, the study's recommendations were aligned with policymakers, developers, and practitioners to ensure relevance and that it applies to all stakeholders involved in renewable energy. As such, under policymakers, some of the recommendations that came up was that it is important to develop strong national social performance frameworks and ESG standards. And we, as social performance, we can attest that we have that huge gap. We also said under recommendation, mandate community inclusion and benefit sharing. For example, learn from the RIP, which Lebi did touch on earlier on. It's okay to benchmark. It's okay to align so that we have progress. Another recommendation under policymakers, we are saying it is important to integrate the use of digital tools or AI for engagement and monitoring. As for developers, we are saying it is important to integrate social performance from project design stage and decision making. We shouldn't be seeing developers engaging social performance practitioners towards the end of the projects because they need to do damage control. We are saying from the onset, have them as part of the project team. Also, still under developers, we are saying ensure transparent communication and grievance mechanism. You can never go wrong if you tackle these aspects because in a way you build that community trust and so forth. Work collaboratively with communities, with governments and other relevant stakeholders. No stakeholder should be left behind. Also ensure inclusivity and accountability by resourcing engagement and acting on community feedback. With community feedback, we are saying it's easy to identify where you have gone wrong and the gaps that need to be addressed. Okay, and then as for practitioners, what we are saying as part of the recommendations is that we have to lead inclusive, cultural sensitive engagement maintaining. Like I've said, once we are dealing with stakeholders, the cultural aspect is very important and it is very sensitive. So we need to address that. Also strengthen capacity building and knowledge sharing. With knowledge sharing, like I've said before, it's easy to identify how you have been doing, what gaps are there, how do you move forward? And also ensure continuous monitoring and accountability by strengthening stakeholder engagement and feedback loops. For monitoring aspect, you have indicators so that you can see if there is progress or if there's a lot of work to be done. With that being said, I'll hand over to you and thank you so much.
Very much for that, Lesedi. It was a pleasure working with you on the study, and I'm sure people will, discover quite crucial information from the report. And thank you once again for your lovely presentation, Lesedi. And what stands out to me and what's being hammered home is that even when social performance is highlighted of its importance, there still remains those systematic gaps that we need to address in order to progress the practice. Before we move on, just a quick note, we will also have time to ask questions for Lesedi after the panel discussion, which is coming right up. So please feel free to note your questions down in the chat or wait until the end so you can raise your hand and ask your question. So to bring those insights that Lesedi has presented on, we have 3 of the panelists that took part in this study, and they're here today to share with us their experiences in a panel discussion facilitated by Yumna Ferfere, who is a senior strategic partner to Inspire and managing director of Towards Uhuru. Yumna has extensive knowledge social performance and the renewable energy sector, amongst other sectors that she has worked on. So her insights really, really, really run deep. We are thankful to have you facilitate this discussion. Yumna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anda, and thank you very much also for asking me to facilitate. It really is a pleasure to do so. I'd like to, maybe before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to also just say that it's been so interesting to hear what you said, Lesedi, in your report. And interesting but not surprising that the outcomes and what your findings is no different to what we experience in South Africa. So clearly there is an alignment between what we're experiencing in social performance in South Africa and on the rest of the continent. And I think the interesting thing is, how do we address those? And Libby, I heard when you were talking, not only what you were saying, but also just the exhaustion and exasperation that, even with the policies that we have in South Africa and the regulations, that we still are not having the impact that we'd like to achieve. So let's start the conversation. I think it's going to be quite interesting to hear from the panelists. I'm going to introduce Tony to you first. Hi, Tony. Tony is the founder and CEO of Renewables in Africa, a clean energy engineering and media platform accelerating Africa's transition to a low carbon future. A recognized industry voice, he advises governments, investors, and developers on renewable energy deployment and market strategy. Tony is also a frequent expert commentator on BBC, France 24, and Forbes Afrique. He's also the author of The Wind Industry Outlook in Africa and has been listed among the top 50 influential African and Afro-Caribbean leaders in the UK. Lovely to have you on the panel, Tony. Next, I'm going to go to Tawanda Collins Muzamweze. Tawanda is an international consultant in sustainability, environmental, and social safeguards. He supports training, capacity building, and audits of sustainability projects. Tawanda implements environmental management projects, cleaner production audits, occupational health and safety programs, and environmental impact assessments. Really great to have you on the panel as well, Tawanda. Then, of course, we have Lesedi. Lesedi, you've met Lesedi. I'm going to formally introduce you again, Lesedi. Lesedi Komi is a social performance practitioner with experience across community development, renewable energy, and climate change-focused initiatives. She's committed to ensuring projects are inclusive, socially responsible, and designed for long-term sustainability, bringing a people-centered approach to development that strengthens community outcomes and project impact. Lovely to have you on the panel as well as hearing your presentation. Thank you, Lesedi. And last but not least, we've got Kathleen Mbeyu Kikuvi. Kathleen is a social safeguarding professional, passionate, I love that term, passionate about development projects that protect vulnerable communities and uphold human dignity. Kathleen works to build inclusive systems that empower people and foster sustainable growth. Welcome to all of you, and lovely to have you on the panel. And I think besides what we're going to talk about, I think it's just so exciting I think for those in the audience who are from South Africa and who are constantly on our webinars, which are always very interesting, but talking about South African topics, it's so really exciting and enjoyable that we are moving into the rest of the continent. I think that's so needed and wonderful that we're kicking this off. So I think more than what we're going to be talking about, it's really lovely that we can meet all of you and that we can meet our colleagues and our fellow social performance practitioners from other countries on the continent. So welcome. And then with regard to the discussion, Libby, you opened up the topic, and there's just so much to talk about in social performance. But of course, we only have a limited time this afternoon. So in discussing with the panelists, we're trying to figure out what would be the best way of us using the time that we have to really get the messages across that we want to get across. And of course, we can't get all of those messages across. So we chose one particular one. And I also just want to give for context, in South Africa, within Inspire, we've just finished writing a book, and here's the manuscript. and it's about the REAP program. So I thought, why don't we take one chapter that we've written on the REAP program, and that's going to be published in the next few months, so please watch this space. Why don't we take one chapter and why don't we explore and compare what we've found in South Africa and see what is experienced elsewhere? And that is, what is the business case of social performance? And is the business case for social performance really understood across various departments of an IPP, but also across the different countries that make up our continent? So we're going to delve into that topic today. And I'm going to actually ask the panelists to come in and tell us a little bit more about yourself. I have given an introduction, but what I'd love you to tell us about is which countries you've worked in, what type of projects you've worked on. And then I'd like to ask you, in kicking off our discussion, I'd like to ask you to please give us your impressions of what is the state of social performance ideology, particularly amongst leadership and management. And by that, I mean, where does the leadership of IPP projects sit? Do they value the business case, or do they understand and do they value social performance? Do they understand that it needs to be what you've said, Lesedi, and also what Libby said earlier, that it needs to be part and parcel of how we do the work that we do? So I'm going to hand over to you to give us some of your perspectives. Shall we start with Tawanda? Let's start with you.
Thank you very much indeed for this event, and also thank you for the kind introductions. The presentation that have come through are fantastic and also very detailed to guide us forward. As introduced, my name is Tawanda Collins in sustainability. I rove around environmental social governance and also environmental social safeguards, but also with work in environmental health and safety. I work with mining companies, construction companies, and manufacturing, and also I support international organizations as well as development banks in terms of social performance in various countries around the world. I would say maybe so far in about 30 countries worldwide where I have supported environmental and social safeguards programs, including environmental impact assessment, including grievance redress mechanism, because sometimes there can be grievances within projects. And financiers are now very much concerned about grievances. And sometimes the grievances may arise 10 years later, 15 years later. You may have grievance of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment as a result of development, not only renewable energy projects, but also any other development project and infrastructure. So training people on grievance redress mechanisms, training them on prevention of child labor, prevention of forced labor, gender mainstreaming, which is really now a chorus amongst financiers and amongst stakeholders, including the participation of women and girls in projects, as well as also in benefit sharing. So those are some of the key indicators, and I've been very privileged to have worked in a number of projects in a number of countries, not only in Zimbabwe. And then moving on to the business case, I would say the business case for social performance is really something that we need to understand, that we don't only do social protection for the sake of being good to humanity. We don't implement human rights at work for just being good to humanity. It makes business sense. Why this webinar also is coming on board is to say, in as much as we are talking about social performance, how do we talk to investors? How do we talk to business people? How do we talk to the CEO? And I think the trap that we have been in as social performance practitioners has been to push these ideals of social performance from a cause perspective, taking gender as a cause that we need to achieve, taking prevention of child labor as a cause, taking inclusive business as a cause, forced labor as a cause. Yes, it is a cause to have gender mainstreaming and gender equality, but it actually makes business sense. We are increasingly seeing that
Tawanda,
many
I'm gonna pause you for just a second because I really want to get into that detail, and I think it's so exciting. But maybe I just want to move on just for a brief introduction to get a sense just across the panelists how those impressions are possibly the same or different. But definitely coming back to you. Lesedi, moving on to you, what is your sense? Or maybe just talk to us about your, where you've worked very briefly, and then what's the state of social performance impression ideology from your perspective?
Thank you, Yamna. As introduced, my name is Lesedi Komi. I'm happy to reflect that I'm a social performance practitioner, primarily working in Botswana, with my work now extending into South Africa by focusing on renewable energy projects as well as research. I've been involved mainly in solar projects, and also had the opportunity to work in one of the biggest solar projects in Botswana, which currently is operating. And I was part of the social performance team. From my experience on the ground, social performance across renewable energy projects is evolving, but it is still uneven, hence the need for such platforms. However, there is growing recognition among renewable energy company leadership, especially in risk management, as it has been said earlier on. You avoid project delays, you avoid community conflicts, which brings about trauma, which is something that we underestimate, and also avoiding reputational damage, which we normally see with the IPPs, the EPCs, the donors, the funders. We also see a growing awareness of the business case, linking robust social performance to project sustainability, easy implementation, as well as long-term value. But this is not yet fully embedded in renewable energy projects, be it the planning phase or the decision-making aspect of it. In essence, there is awareness and there is that major shift, but there's still room for social performance to be incorporated in renewable energy projects. So basically, that is my perspective. Thank you, Yamna.
Thank you very much, Lesedi. I think that's really helpful. I think, and there definitely was a question on the chat as well that I saw about how soon should social performance practitioners come in. And I'm going to leave that, if Livy hasn't answered, I would love to answer that a bit later or ask you guys to do that. Okay. Next, let's move on to Kathleen. Kathleen, maybe just a quick introduction from yourself, and what are your impressions? Oh, you on mute, Kathleen? You are still on mute. Let's move on for a moment. Let's move on to you, Tony, and then we can come back to you, Kathleen. Kathleen, I think you are now sideways, so I'm going to give you a moment to sort that out. And Tony, let's move on to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Perfectly.
Okay, excellent. I think I'm not going to introduce myself if you've done it already, and thank you for the beautiful introduction. So, on my side, so I've worked across the continent, from west to east over a decade, and I would say one thing is very much clear is the fact that projects don't fail because of technology, they fail because of people. And within our company, RIA, so we operate across markets, supporting utility scale project, the CNI solar, and also the distributed energy system. And with regard to social performance, I would say that the maturity is actually uneven across the continent. Because if you look at a large developer, they are more structured, so they know how to handle it relatively well because it's part of their deliverable anyway. For small players, it's more reactive, I would say. And having said that, you can understand that there is a clear leadership gap where many would see social performance as compliance, and few actually truly see it as a value driver. And I've seen projects, for example, in Nigeria and also in Cote d'Ivoire been delayed, due to community misalignment, not technical issues. So it's very much important. So social performance for me is clearly not soft. And one thing I guess that leadership needs to understand that it's an operational risk management. So that's the reason this topic is quite timely and important.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Kathleen, let's move over to you. Perfect.
Sorry about but yes, my name is Kathleen and I'm from Kenya. I'm a social performance practitioner and I'm based in Kenya, actually in Mombasa. I work on development projects that focus on community protection, gender equality, and social inclusion. I have worked funded projects such as partners to the World Bank, where I have contributed to strengthening social safeguard systems, managing risks, and supporting stakeholder engagement processes, right? So my work focuses basically on implementing projects that are inclusive and are responsive to community needs. When it comes to leadership and management, my take is this. I feel that when it comes to leadership and management, there is a increasingly growing awareness of the need of embedding social performance in the project cycle. Why do I say increasingly awareness? It's because I feel now one of the things that has contributed greatly is the impact of what these projects really, how they affect communities and organizations. Yeah, experience has been the greatest teacher in this kind of settings when it comes to management. So over time, because of the impact, right, it has shaped their minds and attitudes into really trying to work around providing, giving projects a stable environment, maximizing on profit, sustainability, and project success. So I feel they are increasingly aware, but there are challenges that we are facing in implementing and embedding and integrating social performance in the overall project cycle. Yes, and that's my take.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kathleen. Thank you to all of you for those initial impressions. I think let's move into then what is the business case? So all of you said a few things about what the business case might be. Let's go into that in a little bit more detail. And Tawanda, I'd like to give you an opportunity, because I'm sorry that I cut you off earlier, is what is that business case? I mean, Tony, you mentioned a few things. You mentioned compliance versus it being a value driver. So what is that value? Let's talk a little bit about what that value is, because I think when we kicked off the discussion, we also said we need to look at who we are speaking to. Libby, you said, are we speaking to the right audience? Tawanda, you also said, let's think about how we talk to investors, CEOs. So when we do that discussion about social performance, what is that value that we carry across? Tawanda, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There is a lot of value that we do carry. And I think what is critical is to link social performance with the financials of the business in order just to avoid, in what I was saying, just running with the cost. I'll give you, for example, if in a particular project there is litigation by communities because their rights have not been met, or if we have got non-state actor or civil society organization that is pushing litigation on behalf of indigenous peoples, if they win this litigation, what it means is that an organization is going to lose money companies are paying millions of dollars for ill-treating workers, for example, in tea plantations, So, but then when you are doing it, when you are ill-treating workers, when you are beating up workers at work or harassing them, it seems like it's working. But then at the end of the day, you can lose money because of the lawsuits. Our colleagues already mentioned the aspects of image. And those are the two things that I will focus on in this intervention. The image of an organization takes many years to build, but it can be destroyed in a second. How many headlines are we seeing of, for example, top management harassing subordinates, managers harassing even internship students? I think in the news you will be hearing these stories. This become a scandal. Your CEO, your managing director, or your board member has been sexually harassing employees. That on its own is a taint on the organization good. And when investors want to buy a business, they also look at the goodwill of the organization. And when there's poor social performance, no one wants to buy the business. So those are the two things that I will focus on: the cost of litigation, which will bind into the revenue of the organization or of the it could be a project, because from my intervention, it seems like it's a private organization. Okay, let's say you are getting 100 million from a development bank, and they are giving you in tranches, 25 million in the first year, 25 million another year, and for 4 years, you are getting 100 million. If you are not managing social performance, your funds won't be replenished. You then see that at the end of the first year, if you are not managing social performance, you won't get that 75,000. And these are the things that we want to avoid.
Thank you for that. I think that's really useful. Talking money, talking the bottom line, and how social performance can help to, from what you have said, is minimize the costs that impact on the bottom line. I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Tawanda. Tony, I saw you come off mic. Do you want to come in there as well?
Yes, certainly. I can do so. With regard to the business case, what I would say is, if, for example, you ignore social performance, you're actually effectively pricing your project incorrectly. So why am I saying that? Because social performance for me will reduce your project risk. So you're having fewer delays, lower conflict just because you take care of your people. And it does improve your bankability. And one thing you need to know about bankability is investor, they're increasingly looking at ESG seriously. And I know a thing or two about that because I'm actually working on a project at the moment with a player in the industry. Obviously, it's been instructed by the investor to strengthen the ESG policy. So yeah, so project risk, bankability, you also would accelerate the execution because you have community buy-in, and that's actually will bring speed. So I would say a project with strong community engagement will move faster to financial close than one that is stuck in resistance, even if the fundamentals are identical. So social performance clearly does not slow down project. It actually prevent them from stopping. So it's not a cost for me. It's I see that more as a multiplier, I would say.
Lovely. So we're talking about, I think, two things there that are important. Tawanda mentioned the bottom line and talking about the finances, and you spoke about the finances as well as our time. So social performance actually increasing the time to completion. No, I mean, sorry,
The execution.
speeding up the time to completion, and then also lowering the cost. I think I love what you said about pricing incorrectly, and you've mentioned including social performance so that you minimize costs later on. And I think if you do it the other way around, if you don't price in adequately and accurately the cost of social performance, it actually becomes important, but to a greater extent later on. So the cost of social performance then actually increases, so which lowers your internal rate of return as well. Great, lovely. Lesedi, how about you? Do you want to come in?
Okay. Thank you, Yamna. Okay, as for my perspective with regard to the business case, I would like to emphasize that indeed social performance is good for business because in a way you reduce risks, you protect the project timelines, and it improves the long-term project value. At its core, it's about securing and maintaining a project's social license to operate because that is very important in this renewable energy projects. And we're also saying that projects that invest early in community engagement are less likely to face delays linked to issues like land disputes and even communities resisting projects due to maybe past experiences and traumas. So my argument basically is me saying with these issues, they are very costly if the project doesn't embed social performance. For example, I'll give an example. Across Africa, there are renewable energy projects that have been stopped due to unresolved land use and compensation issues, something that Tony did touch on. So we are saying these are some of the things that need to be dealt with under the business case aspect. Also, the emphasis is that early, robust engagement, it addresses all these burning issues. And it's something that we want or we advocate for in terms of ensuring that the host communities are okay with the projects coming through. Another aspect that I'd like to touch on is that also in markets like South Africa, where community expectations and regulatory requirements are very stronger, developers are seeing the value of having community benefit schemes and ongoing engagement. This is not just ticking the compliance box, but basically building the trust that it is needed. It is needed with host communities. Something that Lebi also did hint on. So basically, we are saying, or my perspective is that social performance, it does help avoid costly disruptions. And in turn, it ensures there is good stakeholder relationship within the renewable energy projects. Thank you, Yamna.
Thank you very much. Thank you for pointing out just how important it is to think comprehensively about your project, and in doing that, to think about trauma, to think about trust. Thank you, Lesedi. Kathleen?
All right. My take is this: integrating social performance from the planning stage to the implementation up to the end operation phase, I think is necessary and makes a lot of business sense, right? I have worked in projects in Kenya where I have experienced what it means not to integrate social performance. And what does this mean? The policies exist, the frameworks are there, but the social performance practitioners are there. But the challenge comes in the implementation, leadership, all right?
Yes.
And this costed us a lot of time, loss in energy, loss in resources to try and bridge the gap. I call it working backwards. We're implementing, but while we're supposed to be implementing, we have to go back to the planning stage. And what are we doing there? We're going back so that we can fix and firefight what should have been initially implemented. Yes. And this is really an annoyance, let me say this, to the social practitioners, for lack of a better word, because when you gave in your recommendations, they were not, they were not, how do I say it? They were not heard and they were not prioritized. So what does this mean for the project? Financial risks, delays, conflict, compensation issues, legal issues, going back to places where we have to redesign the project. This does what? The cost overruns in the project. It's risky, it's expensive, reputation-wise for the company, loss of social license. And also we have issues to do with missed opportunities where we can't attract investors again. We're not credible. Yeah, the company is not credible. The organization is not credible anymore because you have been flagged as an organization that does not and cannot give back or cannot integrate and cannot propagate for social performance. So it is an important aspect. It is a necessary aspect. It's about profitability for the company. It's about sustainability of the project and overall project success. And that's why we do the projects, right? So for the business sense, it makes a lot of sense for leaders and managers to rethink how they can integrate it and implement it. Yes, as we say, the frameworks exist, but it's putting it on and actually doing it on the ground so that we can gain success. Overall, it's for their own benefit, for organizations to benefit. And if they see it holistically, then they begin to invest appropriately in social performance here.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think you are all going to love to read the book that we've written, because you'll just it's the same things. We are dealing with the same frustrations, like you're saying, annoyances. And I like what you're saying, fix and firefight, as opposed to thinking, as Tony said, more strategically upfront, building the cost of doing social performance properly, building that cost in accurately at the beginning, and by doing so, cutting costs of what might cost dearly later on through delays in construction, delays in operation. Because I think also when we delay the project start, we're delaying income coming back into the project. So, I mean, that's a significant cost. And then what you said as well, Kathleen, is that you can't attract investors again because of the reputational risk. I think there's one thing we don't have time for today, unfortunately, but something that I'd like to think about. We focused on risk mitigation. So the doing social performance as a risk mitigation element or tool, but something that you've touched on, Lesedi, is about the community benefit sharing. And I feel that if we can do that really well, not only does social performance become a risk mitigation tool, it also becomes a value proposition. I mean, if we think about it, IPPs are coming into countries in emerging economies where it's not only about providing affordable, clean energy, but it is also about dealing with many of the other challenges that an emerging economy has. And that is entrepreneurship and education, all of those things. And as an IPP, an independent power producer, if you are able to have a good track record of doing that as well as providing clean, affordable energy, I think that improves your chances as a preferred supplier. But maybe that's more for the next discussion. Now I'm going to ask everyone just to do one final wrap up. We've got 2 minutes to go before we need to close. Any final thoughts in one sentence on what do we do going forward? What is the one thing that we do going forward in order to change the current ideology? I'm going to start with you, Tony.
Okay, so it's going to be quite tough to make in one word. But I would say that we need to probably show to leaders and CEOs that social performance does affect our IRRs, not just reputation. And if it's not in the financial model, so it won't be taken seriously. So they need to be looking at that. I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Lesedi.
Thank you, Yamna. As much as I wanted to unpack more, but I'll just stick to one sentence. So basically, my perspective is that as social performance practitioners, our role is to move from being seen as support personnel to strategic partners in this renewable energy projects. In terms of business case, it is important to link social performance to risk reduction, like we have said, so that the projects succeed. So we are saying, let's build a stronger collaboration amongst the government, the developers, as well as the community to ensure good partnership. I think that's it from my side.
Thank you, Lesedi. Kathleen?
Thank you, Yamna.
And then Tawanda. Thank you so much.
I think for my take is we need to continue to amplify our voice. And I know the challenge is where, and that is what we need to figure out. We need to continue to have bodies that will advocate for the need for social performances. and actually advocate for rights for communities, and also advocate for repercussions and need for stringent measures when it comes to policies and this implementation, right? Responsibility. So we need to amplify our voices. We need to get the message out there, and we need to have a more responsible body that can be able to fight and propagate for the need for responsible safeguarding.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And lastly, Tawanda, one sentence in closing from you.
Thank you very much. I think the key takeaway is also that social performance makes business sense. There's no way you're going to be productive if you are at loggerheads with your stakeholders. So going forward, we need to scale up. We need to build capacity. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Guys, you've heard it. Social performance affects IRR and reputation. We need to become strategic partners as social performance practitioners, and we need to link our work to risk reduction. We need to amplify our voice. We need to have more advocacy and more bodies that do that. We need to get the message across that social performance makes business sense, and we need peace with our stakeholders in order to do better business. So, Anda, I hope that's helpful to take that forward.
Thank you very much, Yumna, and thank you, colleagues, for sharing your brilliant insights into the conversation. And we're hoping this is a start of a longer journey of us having these kinds of conversations so we can delve deeper into answering some of the burning questions that we have. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I will allow people to raise their hands or maybe type them out in the chat again to ask our panelists or comment in what they've just spoken about, such an interesting conversation, but also ask Libby and Lesedi on their presentations as well. I know, Libby, there were a couple of questions for you in the chat. Would you like to come on and respond to those?
Yeah, Anda, thanks. I'm happy to do that. Mike asked when the appropriate stage of a renewable energy project is for social performance practitioners to be brought in. I think that's kind of been answered through the panel. In my view, it's as early as possible. And I think depending on where you're sitting will determine how that comes in. So I absolutely loved what Tony said about if you don't bring it in early, you're not pricing your project properly. And I think there's a screening stage in any project where the technological aspects screen, the commercial aspect, and there should be ESG incorporating social performance. And it's the very, very early stages, because it's always astounded me how people, social performance practitioners, have a different perspective than developers, for example, or the commercial side. So to bring that in and build in that perspective and those potential risks into the model, and also in how the project is designed, and what benefit sharing mechanisms are there. So that was Mike's question. Should I quickly just go to Hazel's as well?
That'd be great, Libby. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. So Hazel, thank you for your question. So Hazel asked about who are the key stakeholders and decision makers to engage with in order to show meaningful and impactful social performance outcomes. Again, I think it depends for you, what organization are you part of, who are your stakeholders, and who are the ones who can influence. So for example, if you're in an IPP, your stakeholder might be the development team. And for you to bring that real language around why it's of value, why it actually reduces cost, why it made it reduce development time, and to what I'd really encourage there is to be of value to your team. So as a social performance practitioner, know who you're talking to and what language they speak. So if it's someone who is responsible for the commercials of it, use your language around social performance in a commercial perspective. If it's someone who is the developer and looking at the development timelines, use your language around how this can enhance development timelines and reduce risk of that. So I think, again, is look at who are your most influential stakeholders, your own, and influence there. Just one last thing on that. I don't want to take too much time, but Hazel, it looks like you're part of an investment manager. From what I've seen from sitting within the different players and the different ecosystems of renewable energy, from consultant to developer to investor to DFI, I think that the ones with the money, have enormous influence. And I've been in a situation where I've had a shareholder who has really, really pushed for excellence in social performance, which made me do it in my company. And so as an investor, as representing the investor, hold the line on excellence in social performance and push your portfolio companies to hold that line. You can have enormous influence on people like the CEO and the development teams to really hold that line. So I'll stop there, but those would be my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Libby, and thank you for the questions from Mike and Hazel. Any other questions from the chat? You can raise your hand and speak up if you'd prefer that. But whilst we look at that, any comments from our panelists? Anything you'd like to add from the questions that were asked in the chat, or any closing reflections? Should we go on?
Sorry.
I'll come to you just now, Tony.
Oh, is it my turn, Anda?
Yes, please go ahead, Lesedi, and then Tony can come
All
after
right, thank you. I just wanted to hint on ensuring that all the stakeholders are covered. Like I've said, we have stakeholder mapping. It is a very critical and effective tool whereby you ensure that all the stakeholders are not left behind. So I'm just adding on to what Libby was saying. She did touch on the investors, but on a broader picture, once you have that technique, it's easy to see that all the key stakeholders are covered and no one is left behind. I just wanted to add that aspect.
Thank you, Lesedi. Tony, you can come in, and then Yumna.
All right.
Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Yeah, I think I just wanted to add something very quick in here to say that it's important, nevertheless, to be able to translate social performance into business language. So in terms of the risk, returns, and timelines, and where possible, engage earlier, as we said, and not after issue has arisen, because sometimes it's far too late when we do that. And it's all about raising awareness and educating leadership, so that they can understand that it will move more from compliance into their strategy. So this way, I guess, as well, so we'll have a much better, I would say, journey in bringing them with the question of social performance and get them to support. That's what I just wanted to very quickly mention.
Thank you very much, Tony. Yumna, I would like to pose a question to you. Maybe you can come on with your reflection as well. Let's see if you would like to respond to this. Balungile asked that REAP promotes community shareholding through community trust to ensure long-term socioeconomic benefits. However, challenges such as limited governance capacity and delays in benefit distribution have emerged. What are the panelists' views on the effectiveness of community trusts as a model for delivering sustainable community benefits?
That is a big question, Anda. And it's got a whole chapter in our book. So I think it is potentially very, very effective, potentially, but it is not effective yet, because what we have focused on is we focused on the shareholding certificate as ownership rather than real enablement and enablement of community agency as ownership. So I think if we start to think of the outcome, the envisaged outcome as real community agency being what we mean by ownership, then it affects what we actually do to be able to get communities to get to that point. And capacity building, and sometimes it's not necessarily capacity building. Community might have the capacity. We're just imposing a very a rigid glass ceiling over communities, so we can't hear their voice. We prefer not to listen to their voice. So, but I can talk for a day and a half on on community trust. But I think why I put up my hand is actually to say specifically. So we've said bring in social performance early. I want to say bring in social performance specifically early at business development stage. So we don't have to necessarily engage communities at business development stage just yet, because I think there we might create expectations, and so there's the fear of that. But certainly bring in social performance, because what social performance practitioners can do alongside, while other financial feasibility and, the wind strength or the solar strength is being looked at, and what the costs are of leasing the land, etc. Social performance practitioners at that point can start talking to local government, can start talking to other development agents, other NGOs, etc., just to understand what is the lay of the land, so that when you are costing the project, you can actually say, guys, this is a community, for example, that has been really traumatized by mining. They are not going to let anything get across the line unless they completely are participating and sharing in the benefit. So those kind of things need to happen right from the word go. I just wanted to say that, to be quite specific about actually where exactly to bring social performance practitioners in.
All right. Thank you very much, Yumna, and massive thank you to our panelists and speakers for today, Libby, Tony, Lesedi, Kathleen, and Tawanda. Thank you very much for making the time to be with us. And thank you for coming and making time to be a part of our afternoon and this engagement. As we close today's session, I would like to share a few final reflections from Inspire's side, in that we're deeply committed to advancing both practical and strategic exchange among practitioners across the continent. Hence, we were tempted to broaden our horizon and do the study. We see value, strong value in creating spaces where experiences, lessons, and approaches can be shared, more consistently. And we hope that this webinar is a start of many, and we can engage more in discussions of this nature. Obviously, looking ahead, we're interested in building ongoing platforms for engagement. This could take shape in a form of a community of practice, a working group, linking Africa-wide initiatives and industry platforms. We're very open and gladly welcome collaboration and feedback from across the sector and the continent, and look forward to engaging further and continuing this work. So thank you very much for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. And thanks to the panelists as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.